Some of them crossed deserts because the rain failed. Some climbed passes because war came too close. Some were taken by force. Some followed trade. Some followed love. Some followed hunger. And many, once they arrived somewhere new, became local people so completely that later descendants forgot they had ever come from elsewhere. This is where the story becomes personal, because DNA does not only reveal mixing, it reveals how fragile survival was. Most people who ever lived left no living descendants at all. Their line ended quietly. No one mourns them now because no one remembers their names. They are the lost majority of human history. Your line did not end. Against war, illness, accident, famine, storms, childbirth, and sheer bad luck, it continued. Again and again, someone lived long enough to have a child, who also lived long enough to have a child. When you look at ancestry that way, your existence starts to feel less ordinary and more like an unbroken chain of escapes. One small story helps make that real. Imagine a family at the edge of the last ice age, not as a dramatic movie scene, but as an ordinary evening. A mother keeps embers alive. A father repairs a tool. A child coughs in the cold. Food is low. Winter is too long. Nothing about them feels historically important. There are no crowns, no battle speeches, no written laws. Yet, if that child survives the season, if she grows up, if she has children, then one ordinary night becomes part of thousands of futures. That is how ancestry really works, quietly, repeatedly, without witnesses. Or picture a farming family several thousand years later. They have heard rumors of newcomers arriving from far away, different accents, different burial customs, different animals. At first, the strangers are just stories. Then they become trading partners, then neighbors, then spouses. A generation later, the distinction begins to blur. No one in that village thinks we are transforming the genetic history of a continent. They think about harvests, illness, jealousy, rain, and whether a child will live through spring. But behind those ordinary concerns, something vast is unfolding. Peoples are merging, new lineages are forming, future identities are being born. This is why ancestry is never just about maps. A map makes movement look clean. A line crosses a border and arrives. Real life is messier. Someone resists, someone welcomes, someone disappears into the crowd, someone changes language for survival, someone marries across an old divide. That is where genetic history is made. And that messiness does not stop once a population settles. Remember the impossible math of ancestors. Even after a population becomes local, your family tree keeps folding back on itself. The same village names repeat. The same bloodlines rejoin. Distant cousins become spouses. Strangers become kin within a few generations. That means your ancestry is both wider and narrower than it first appears. Wider because it pulls in unexpected people from unexpected places. Narrower because the deeper you go, the same ancestors return many times. A single woman 500 years ago may sit in your tree through dozens of different paths. So when people say they want to find their roots, they often imagine a straight tunnel down to one hidden origin. DNA keeps interrupting that fantasy. It says your roots are not one root. They are a mat beneath the soil. Tug one strand, and 10 others move. Follow one branch, and it disappears into older, denser growth. That can feel unsettling at first. Many people want certainty from ancestry. They want the answer to be one place, one people, one line they can point to and say, that is me. But genetic history often gives a more complicated gift. It gives connection instead of simplicity. It tells you that your family is probably more mixed than your documents admit. Your local identity may be recent compared with the age of the ancestors who shaped you. The border your grandparents treated as permanent may be younger than the oldest inherited traces in your cells. Even family legends can change under that light. The story about being only from one region may turn out to hide migration from another. The claim that your line was isolated may crumble when DNA shows centuries of movement. Sometimes the surprise brings joy, sometimes confusion, sometimes grief. Because ancestry is not only scientific information, it is belonging. It is the answer people give when they ask themselves who they are. So when new evidence challenges that answer, the reaction can be deeply emotional. Some feel expanded, others feel untethered. Some discover family secrets that were hidden for a reason. Adoption, migration, slavery, conquest, forced conversion, war, name changes, and passing across social lines have all left marks on family stories. Paper records can hide those marks. DNA sometimes reveals them without asking permission. That is one reason these discoveries can feel less like data and more like an earthquake. Yet there is also something strangely comforting in the disruption. If your family tree is more tangled than you thought, so is everyone else's. The people who seem most certain of pure origin often rest on the same looping ancestry as everyone around them. Human history does not grant anyone a simple line. In fact, the deeper researchers go, the more they find evidence of what some call ghost populations. These are groups we know existed because their genetic traces appear in later people, even when we have few bones or no written record to describe them clearly. Entire branches are inferred from echoes. Think about how extraordinary that is. A people can vanish so completely that history forgets their name, yet still live on in descendants who have no idea they carry that inheritance. A lost population can survive as a faint pattern in chromosomes, waiting tens of thousands of years to be recognized. That means your body may contain signatures from people no one can yet fully identify. Not because you are mysterious in some mystical way, but because the human past is still unfinished. We are learning it piece by piece, and every new sample from an ancient burial or cave can redraw the picture. Then there's the question of which ancestors actually mattered genetically, and this surprises most people. Genealogy and genetics are not the same thing. Someone can be your ancestor on paper and still leave no detectable DNA in you after enough generations. Other ancestors may contribute more simply through the randomness of inheritance. So your family story operates on two levels at once. There are the remembered ancestors whose names travel through documents, and there are the biological ancestors whose surviving fragments actually helped build you. Sometimes those groups overlap neatly, often they do not. That difference changes how we define lineage itself. A surname may feel important because it survives in records, but surnames are recent inventions compared with human time. DNA cares less about what was written at the top of a ledger and more about who actually passed living material to future children. In that sense, history is both colder and more honest. It is colder because it forgets names easily. It is more honest because it refuses to privilege only the ancestors who were powerful enough to be recorded. The unknown woman whose line survived matters just as much as the nobleman with a seal and a coat of arms. Often, she matters more. That idea can be quietly revolutionary. Many family histories were built from fathers, property, and formal marriage lines. Ancient DNA keeps reintroducing everyone else. The daughters whose names vanished, the outsiders who entered the community, the children raised away from their biological kin, the people who belonged without paperwork. One burial after another has made that impossible to ignore. Researchers open graves expecting a standard household and sometimes find something more complicated. A child buried with adults who were not biological parents but may have been caregivers. Half-siblings, maternal lines stretching across regions, social family and genetic family refusing to match. That mismatch does not weaken the idea of family. If anything, it deepens it. It reminds us that human beings have always built belonging in more than one way. Blood matters. Care matters too. Shared survival matters. A child fed through winter does not care whether the hands are linked by perfect pedigree charts. Still, the genetic picture keeps widening. When scientists compare many living populations, they can sometimes detect signs of very old mixing events that happened long before recorded civilizations. Those events may help explain why certain traits appear where they do, or why two populations separated today still share surprisingly deep connections. In Africa, the birthplace of our species, the story is especially rich and still only partly told. Human diversity there is deep, ancient, and complex. Multiple populations moved, separated, met again, and exchanged genes over immense spans of time. Any simplistic account of one origin instantly becomes inadequate. That matters because some people once misused the discovery of Neanderthal ancestry to build false hierarchies among living humans, but the broader genetic picture destroys that abuse. All living people are overwhelmingly close relatives. The differences between populations are tiny compared with what we share, and African histories themselves are profoundly layered. So the discovery that changes every family tree is not a ranking of bloodlines. It is the collapse of ranking itself. It is the realization that all lines are mixed, all lines fold, and all lines disappear into older shared human ground. Purity is not ancient truth. It is recent illusion. Consider how fast shared ancestry spreads. Go back only a few thousand years, and the web of human relationships becomes astonishingly interconnected, especially within regions that traded, migrated, or intermarried. The farther back you go, the more likely it becomes that many people alive today share some of the same ancestors. That does not mean everyone inherited the same DNA from those people. Remember, genetics is selective and uneven, but genealogically, the web becomes dense very quickly. The more families connect, the more your tree stops belonging only to you. It becomes part of a much larger human lattice, and that changes the emotional meaning of strangers. The person from another country, another language, another faith may not just be metaphorically related to you. Deep in the arithmetic of ancestry, there may be countless paths by which families like yours and theirs touched the same old roots. That does not erase difference. It does not cancel culture, memory, or suffering, but it introduces humility. The people we treat as separate may share more hidden past than politics admits. The history we call foreign may have shaped our own bloodline generations before anyone started drawing hard borders. This is one reason viewers become obsessed with ancestry stories. They are not really chasing percentages on a test. They are chasing reunion. They want to know whether the strange sense of connection they feel to a place, a face, or a forgotten era might have some anchor in reality. Sometimes the answer is surprising. A person raised with one family story takes a DNA test and learns of ancestry from elsewhere. At first, it feels like disruption. Then details emerge. A great-grandparent crossed an ocean. A line changed religion. A child was renamed. What looked like a contradiction becomes a recovered chapter. But the deeper revelation is that this happens at every scale. Families rediscover hidden fathers, mothers, and siblings. Populations rediscover lost migrations. Humanity as a whole rediscovers contact with other ancient humans. The pattern repeats from household to species. And we are always more entangled than we think. Even the word bloodline can mislead if we imagine it as a pure stream flowing untouched through time. A better image is a river fed by countless tributaries. Some are obvious, some are seasonal, some ran strong for a while and vanished underground. Yet the river you see now exists because all of them met. And there is grief in that image too. Every tributary that joins a larger river loses some of its separate name. Languages disappear, local customs fade, faces once common become rare. Whole peoples can be absorbed so thoroughly that only a faint genetic signal remains to say they were ever here. Ancient DNA has become a kind of rescue work for those forgotten people. Not perfect rescue. Science cannot restore their voices completely, but it can prove they existed, that they mixed, that they mattered, and that later generations carried them forward even after memory failed. That is a powerful form of return. Imagine being erased from history, but not from heredity. No monument bears your name. No legend sings about your tribe. Yet one day, tens of thousands of years later, scientists pull a fragment from bone dust and realize you were part of the making of the modern world. That is almost unbearably moving. It should also change how we treat our own present. The people dismissed, displaced, or silenced now may one day be recognized as central to the future. History has a habit of pretending that only the winners mattered. Genetics keeps uncovering the invisible builders underneath the official story. So when you look at your family tree after hearing all this, the branches may feel different. Not broken, not false, just incomplete. The names you know are real, but they are only the recent layer. Behind them stands a vast crowd of unrecorded people whose choices still live in you. Some met across fear, some met across curiosity, some across trade routes, some across violence, some across hunger, some across love so ordinary no one thought it would matter. Yet here you are, made from the consequences of all of it. That is what the DNA discovery really exposes. It tells you that your ancestry is not a sealed inheritance handed down unchanged. It is survival after contact, continuity through mixing, identity built from repeated encounters with the unfamiliar. In that sense, every family tree is also a story about outsiders becoming insiders, and strangers becoming grandparents. The old image of ancestry promised certainty. The new image offers wonder. It says that within your body lives a record of encounters larger than memory, older than nations, and more intimate than textbooks admit. It says your reflection is not just your parents repeated, it is deep time made visible. And maybe that is why this subject grips people so hard, because it validates a feeling many have carried without words, the feeling that you are more than one small modern category, that somewhere behind your known relatives stands a longer human story pulling on you like a tide. You may never know most of their names. You may never learn exactly which ancient woman passed down a useful immune trait, or which forgotten migration bent your line toward a new continent, or which buried child represents the first meeting of families that history kept separate. But their absence does not make them unreal. You have DNA in your body right now from people who were never supposed to be part of your family, not distant cousins, not strangers, something older than history, human and not quite human. And once you understand how it got there, you will never look at your family tree the same way again. For most of your life, you were probably taught to picture ancestry as a neat tree. 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, a set of branches stretching backward in tidy order. But the latest DNA discoveries say that picture was wrong from the start. The old story of ancestry felt safe because it was simple. You came from one people, one line, one homeland, one inherited story. Maybe your family passed down a name, a village, a flag, or a rumor about distant roots. It sounded solid, almost permanent. But DNA does not care about family myths. It does not care what got written in church books, carved onto gravestones, or repeated at reunions. It carries older memories than paper ever could, and lately those memories have started talking back in ways historians were never prepared for. Here's the part that changes everything. The discovery was not just that people moved around more than we thought. It was not even just that different populations mixed. The real shock was that the human family tree is not truly a tree at all. It is a web, a braid, a knot. And once that knot appears, everything changes. Your idea of who counts as family changes. Your picture of ancient history changes. Even the meaning of the word ancestor starts to shift because some of the people living inside your DNA were erased from the stories long before the stories began. Start with a simple fact. Almost everyone learns in school. Each person has 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents. Keep doubling the number and the tree grows fast, so fast it seems almost magical, like the past opening wider and wider with every generation you climb. Go back just 10 generations, roughly the distance to the late 1700s for many families, and you already have more than 1,000 ancestral slots. Go back 20 generations, and the number explodes past 1 million. Keep going, and something impossible happens. By 30 generations, which is not even especially deep in human time, the number of ancestral positions becomes larger than the population of many entire regions that were actually alive then. By 40 generations, it can exceed the number of people on Earth who existed at the time. That cannot be right. So what happened? The answer is that your ancestors repeat. The same people appear again and again in different places on your chart. Cousins married cousins without knowing it. Villages folded in on themselves. Whole communities shared grandparents buried far deeper in the past than anyone remembered. There's a name for this collapsing pattern. Some call it pedigree collapse. The phrase sounds clinical, but the idea is intimate. Your family tree does not spread outward forever like an untouched oak. It loops back. It crosses itself. The farther back you go, the less your ancestry looks like separate branches and the more it looks like woven thread. That alone would be enough to change how you see every surname and every origin story. But then scientists found something even more unsettling. Those repeating branches do not only cross with people whose names are lost. In some cases, they cross with whole populations we once believed were gone beyond recovery. For a long time, ancient history was written mostly from things people left behind: pottery, weapons, walls, graves, fragments of language. That meant the loudest cultures often got remembered, while quieter people vanished. If no one wrote your name down, history could step over you and keep walking. DNA changed that balance. Suddenly bones in caves, teeth in frozen ground, and even tiny scraps of inner ear tissue could speak with astonishing clarity. Not in sentences, of course, but in patterns, in relationships, in hidden kinships no monument ever recorded. And those patterns began revealing a past that felt less like a neat royal family portrait, and more like a crowded room full of cousins, migrants, adoptees, survivors, and strangers who became ancestors simply because they met at exactly the right moment and lived long enough to have children. That is why this matters to you, not because ancient DNA is abstract science, but because it tears open the comfortable distance between your life and theirs. The people who crossed mountains, fled drought, survived winter, or met someone from a different world entirely are not just historical characters. They are in you. Ancient DNA itself is a small miracle. Most old bones do not preserve much genetic material. Time breaks it apart. Heat destroys it. Moisture contaminates it. For years, many scientists thought deep ancestry would stay locked away forever, like a language with no living speaker. Then, techniques improved. Laboratories became cleaner. Contamination was controlled. Researchers learned where to look and how to read broken fragments, like detectives reconstructing a letter from ashes. A tooth root could hold a whisper. A dense bone in the skull could hold an entire chapter. At first, the results were cautious. Scientists confirmed relationships inside burial sites. They found mothers and sons, brothers and cousins, family groups laid side by side. Useful work, but still close to what traditional genealogy already promised. Then the findings grew strange, fast. Skeletons from one region showed ancestry from another. People buried with the customs of one culture sometimes had genetic roots in a very different one. Populations thought to have vanished turned out not to vanish at all. They had blended, been absorbed, renamed, forgotten, and carried forward in bodies that no longer knew their original story. History, in other words, did not move in straight lines. It lurched, it merged, it doubled back. Whole peoples disappeared from the written record while surviving inside future generations. That is the part mainstream storytelling often misses, because it is harder to fit into simple maps and cleaner myths. Now here's where it gets personal. One of the biggest shocks came from a question many people once thought had already been settled. What happened to the Neanderthals? For a long time, the popular answer was simple. They died out and we replaced them. One species gone, another one left standing. But then researchers compared ancient genetic material with DNA from living people, and the clean ending fell apart. Many people alive today, especially those whose ancestors lived outside Africa, carry a small amount of Neanderthal DNA. Not enough to turn you into something else, but enough to change the story forever. Think about what that means in human terms. At some point, tens of thousands of years ago, two groups that textbooks once treated as separate worlds met face to face. They did not only fight or pass by, some of them formed bonds. Some had children. Those children survived. That survival is the real miracle. Ancient encounters are easy to imagine as brief accidents. But a child becomes ancestry only if that line keeps going. One birth becomes 2, then 4, then dozens, then thousands. A single family decision around one campfire can echo inside millions of living people. So when you hear that you may carry Neanderthal DNA, it is not just a strange trivia fact. It is evidence of intimacy. It is proof that the boundary we drew between us and them was never as absolute as we wanted. Their story entered ours, and ours continued through theirs. And Neanderthals were not monsters from old cave paintings. They buried their dead. They cared for injured members who would not have survived alone. They used tools, pigments, and fire. They endured brutal landscapes. In many ways, they were recognizable enough to love, fear, grieve, and hope. That changes the emotional weight of the past. Instead of imagining ancient populations as labels on a chart, you begin to picture actual people. A woman standing near firelight, a man limping through snow with help from his group, a child laughing in a cave entrance. Their world feels smaller, closer. Suddenly it feels personal. But Neanderthals were only the beginning. Scientists eventually discovered traces of another ancient group hidden in living people, even before they had a full picture of who those people were. The DNA came first. The human story had to catch up later. That group became known as the Denisovans, named after a cave in Siberia where a few fragments were found. Not a kingdom, not a civilization with palaces, a finger bone, a few teeth, a shadow. And yet that shadow stretched across whole regions of the modern world. Today, some populations in Asia and Oceania carry notable Denisovan ancestry. That means another meeting happened, or many meetings happened, between modern humans and a group nearly forgotten by time. Again, the same lesson returned. The past was not a parade of pure peoples. It was contact, mixing, improvisation. But one discovery made it impossible to pretend these were just rare, distant events. In that same Siberian cave, scientists analyzed bone fragments from a young girl who had lived tens of thousands of years ago. What they found stopped researchers cold. Her mother was Neanderthal. Her father was Denisovan. Imagine the scene behind that result. Two ancient populations we tend to discuss like distant categories were, in one child, already family, not theory, not abstract mixing over millennia. A mother, a father, a daughter. 3 lives collapsed into one extraordinary piece of bone. That girl is often given the nickname Denny. The nickname makes her sound almost modern, which is part of why her story hits so hard. She was not a chart. She was a child. She had parents with different backgrounds. She belonged to more than one lineage at once. If that sounds familiar, it should. People today live with mixed identities all the time. Different languages at home, different grandparents with different customs, a name from one side of the family and a face from another. Denny reminds us that this layered inheritance is not a modern exception. It is ancient. Her existence also reveals something else. These groups were not always separated by insurmountable walls. They overlapped in time and space. They met often enough that a child like her could be born. And once you accept that, the past stops feeling like sealed compartments and starts feeling like shared ground. That shared ground is what changes every family tree. Not because every person carries the same ancient mixture, but because the model itself breaks apart. The old family tree assumed separate trunks. DNA shows braided roots. The farther back you go, the harder it becomes to keep bloodlines in clean boxes. This does not mean identity is fake. It means identity is layered. Your family can still be your family. Your traditions still matter. Your language, faith, and customs still shape you. But beneath the stories handed down across a few centuries lies a deeper story full of meetings your family never recorded. And some of those meetings shaped your body in ways you can still feel today. Certain immune responses in living people appear connected to ancient admixture, which means interbreeding was not just a historical accident. In some cases, those inherited traits may have helped later populations survive unfamiliar climates, pathogens, or landscapes. So the ancient past is not dead inside you. It may influence how your body reacts to sunlight, altitude, cold, disease, or sleep. Not in some magical destiny-driven way, but in the very real sense that survival tools were passed forward because they worked well enough to keep children alive. Think about that for a moment. Somewhere far behind your known grandparents, long before surnames and family photos, there were people adapting to harsh winters, high mountains, new diets, and deadly illnesses. If even a tiny part of their successful survival strategy traveled down to you, then your body is carrying their solved problems. That is what makes genetics feel almost haunting. A trait you take for granted may be older than any nation you belong to. A pattern in your immune system may trace back to an encounter no storyteller remembered. A physical tendency in your family may have been purchased with someone else's impossible winter. But ancient admixture is only one part of the discovery. The bigger transformation came when researchers began sampling more graves, more regions, more time periods. Suddenly, migration was not a footnote. It was the engine of history. People moved farther, mixed more often, and changed each other more deeply than older textbooks admitted. Europe, for example, did not come from one continuous people slowly becoming modern. It was remade again and again. Hunter-gatherers lived there first. Farmers arrived from the Near East and changed diets, settlements, and family patterns. Later, steppe herders moved west and altered the population once more. None of those waves simply erased the last one. They blended with what was already there, unevenly and over generations. In some places, the change was dramatic. In others, it was gradual. But the result was the same. The ancestry of later families came from multiple deep sources, layered like paint beneath fresh color. The same is true far beyond Europe. South Asia carries ancient mixtures from several major streams, including deep indigenous ancestry and later movements that reshaped language and culture. The Middle East reflects repeated contact among farmers, traders, empires, and pastoral groups. North Africa bears marks of Africa, the Mediterranean, and Southwest Asia. East Asia tells its own story of long movement, mixture, and local survival. The Americas were peopled by journeys so old and difficult that even now researchers continue refining the routes and relationships. Island populations preserve clues to extraordinary sea travel. Mountain communities keep signals of adaptation that border on astonishing. In every region, the more DNA scientists study, the harder it becomes to defend the fantasy of untouched purity. Most populations are not ancient glass cases sealed from outside contact. They are living mosaics. Some pieces are obvious. Others are buried so deep that only genetics could reveal them. That matters because family trees are usually built from recent memory. A document might take you back 300 years if you're lucky. A church record, tax roll, marriage license, or grave inscription can extend the line a little farther. But DNA ignores the limit of surviving paperwork. It reaches into centuries where names were not preserved, then millennia where writing did not exist at all. It tells you that your ancestors were not only the people who passed down a surname. They were shepherds, fisherwomen, runaways, captives, migrants, translators, healers, second sons, adopted children, and lonely survivors.